So Lisa, you started teaching in the late 80s, and things have really changed since then. But what got you into teaching in the very beginning?
Well, I originally majored in journalism. I am a lover of words, writing, literature, and after having my own children, I realized that I wanted to be in the classroom, that I wanted to instill in children and touch their lives in some way. And it was important to me to not just teach a subject, but to teach children and to make a difference in their lives. So I went back to school as a mom and got my teaching certificate and started teaching middle grades. Well, I taught every grade from second through high school, but I spent about 16 years teaching 8th grade, and 8th grade is they're hormones with feet. They are totally hormonal. They actually go through a stage that's a brain plateau, where at times their brain is frozen. They may think their brain dead, but they're totally social. They're totally involved in themselves and each other, and school is the last thing on their minds. And I dearly love those 13, 14, and 15-year-olds.
What kind of changes? I know you speak a lot. You go around and you give speeches a lot on how Common Core has changed the classroom. Give us some excerpts of what you talk about when you speak. How has it changed?
Well, when I first started teaching back in the late 80s, of course, we had standards. I taught in Georgia at that time, and we had standards. We had state requirements, but we had standardized testing, but they were given once or twice a year to only certain grade levels, and they were never really considered anything important. What was important was what went on in the classroom. What was important was being able to engage children and make a difference. And I used to have themes in my classroom, and when you're dealing with students, parents have heard this all the time: that's not fair, why are you doing that, that's not fair. And I used to tell my students that fair does not mean equal. When it comes to teaching and children, you're dealing one-on-one, and fair is what's in the best interest of each child. And as a teacher, I never saw any two children who were exactly alike. They all needed that individualized attention. They all needed to know that they were special and that they counted. It didn't matter if they were the most successful academically or athletically or the most popular. Those kids struggled, had their own struggles too. And what's happening with Common Core is that this administration seeks to equalize the playing field. And their goal to equalize the playing field is done in such a way that it makes it equal, but it's not fair, because each child is coming from a different place. An example I give when I give my speeches is that if you took 3 middle school kids, 3 8th graders, at that age physically they're all over the place. Some have had growth spurts, some have not, and you could have 3 8th graders who were of all different heights. And if you took 3 middle school boys and you took them to a stone wall where there was a football game on the other side, and they all wanted to see the football game on the other side, you could get 3 boxes and let all 3 of them stand on the boxes. But the problem is that the shortest boy can't see over the fence because the box is not tall enough. The middle boy could maybe stand on tiptoes and see over the fence. And the tallest boy could just look right over standing on the box. And that's what Common Core does. It sets a middle ground where only certain students can move forward with what's given.
Before Common Core came, there was a real shift in education, though, with No Child Left Behind. What did you notice in your classroom when that came about in early 2000,
Yes.
late 90s?
Yes. No Child Left Behind came into effect, was written in 2001, my first full year of really seeing the implementation was 2002, which ironically that was the year that my youngest child graduated high school. So my two boys never saw No Child Left Behind. They are both successful college students. The oldest one graduated from Emory University, got in as a public high school graduate, and went in as a freshman to Emory University. But prior to No Child Left Behind, teaching 8th grade students, middle school students who are not engaged in learning, who are not interested in learning, I had to do creative and innovative things. I had to do things that got them enthusiastic about learning, that gave them a really strong hands-on approach to what they were learning. Subject-verb agreement and literature, classic literature, poetry from American Lit is not always the most exciting thing for anyone. But I found ways that got my students involved and learning and really having a good time. When No Child Left Behind came into effect, all of our research-based middle school concepts went out the window, and we went back to trying to meet AYP, which is No Child Left Behind's measurement of accountability.
And AYP stands for?
It stands for Adequate Yearly Progress. And it is a single measure that is unrealistic. And what happened when we started having to, as a school and as a system and as a state, meet AYP, it all became about the test. It all became about standardized testing. My creative, innovative lesson plans and activities were thrown out the window. I was told, you do not have time to do these. You do not have time to teach your required curriculum. You need to be doing these test prep booklets. And that's all we did. We started the year with a pre-test. We evaluated. We conferenced. We did that 3 times, totally in preparation for the final test at the end of the year. My principal told me, do not teach this novel that is required of your students to go into high school next year. Get those test prep books out because we must pass AYP. I became a data drone and became overwhelmed in paperwork. I no longer could get to know my students. I no longer could deal with them one-on-one. It was all about the test.
Now, some teachers thought that might change with Common Core, but did it change that way?
Well, a lot of people have the misconception that No Child Left Behind was replaced with Common Core, and that is not the case. No Child Left Behind is the current reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that was passed in 1965 by Lyndon Johnson. No Child Left Behind is still in effect. It is currently up to be reauthorized, and the bill that is being proposed makes it to where states have no authority. The federal government will ultimately take total control of the school if it's passed. And it pretty much cements Common Core as the means for implementing all of education in the nation. That could even, for the states that have opted out, that could even bring a really bad problem if they don't opt out if it's passed. But Common Core came in on top of No Child Left Behind. And in order for states to receive the No Child Left Behind flexibility waiver, they had to agree to adopt Common Core. And what Alabama did, and the flexibility waiver really only addresses 2 things: a small amount of Title I funds, and it changes the accountability measure from AYP to a different measure. In Alabama, that measure is Alabama Plan 2020, and that was our companion document to the agreement to implement Common Core. Alabama Plan 2020 has a lot of things in it that parents need to find out about because it takes away their authority over their children.
Stop right there. Say that again, because that's a good cutting point. Say Plan 2020, parents need to know. Just try to restate what you just said and then keep going.
Okay. Alabama Plan 2020 is something that parents really need to know about, because contained within it are many things that steal parents' authority over their children. It goes back to the concept of it takes a village. The village raises the child. The things that we've been hearing on in the media about your children belong to the community. All of these social justice concepts are found in Alabama Plan 2020.
And that it has been implemented in our state now.
Yes, it has been implemented. Some of it is being done through health clinics in schools, which was a goal. Other things that are happening is that schools are contracting with private psychology firms. And one thing that parents need to understand when it comes to psychological behavioral assessments, within the law in medical settings, HIPAA prevents the sharing of any kind of medical information, including psychological information. But there is an exemption with HIPAA that any medical information that is collected in a school setting, in an educational setting, is exempt from that, and that data can be shared. It becomes a part of the child's record, and it becomes a part of going with them out into the world.
And any third party
can get that information, and part of the testing that is taking place is collecting psychosocial behavioral data with ACT, with ACT. And one of the tests that is given in Alabama to high school seniors is ACT Work Keys. It has several components, which are soft skills, but it has another component, which is a psychosocial behavioral assessment. And it becomes a part of the child's vocational work record. And if they go for the national certification, employers who are employing high school students or vocational schools that are taking high school students have access to that information.
And that could include, tell me if I'm wrong, maybe your attitudes towards same-sex marriage, or where you go to church, those kind, or what's your religious affiliation with those? Are those things asked on that?
Those things are included in some of the testing, and it's also done very covertly through the actual questions to try to get an attitude assessment. But one of the things that it actually does, and it tells you on the website, that it evaluates the child's attitudes, work ethic, things that you don't necessarily want to be testing a 16 or 17-year-old for, because they're not at the maturity level to understand the workforce and a strong work ethic. And so it's labeling them with a psychological label at an age where they're still in the minority. They are still a minor, and as a minor, they're not ready to make those kind of life decisions. The other thing that Alabama Plan 2020 does is that where it changed the measure of accountability from AYP to the measure that is there, it changed it from a single standard to one that is race-based. And it's saying that we're going to equalize the playing field by making the expectation for blacks who are at the bottom much less than the Asians who are at the top. And what I found in my classroom is that my students were at all different places, and we're all going to achieve at a different level. But if I did not expect the very best out of all of them, I could not get them to their absolute complete potential. And by not measuring them or not having an expectation of them as being able to at least attempt to do the level of the highest, they're never going to get there. That's
Lisa, do you think, is this a Republican-Democrat issue? Is Common Core being pushed by one party or the other?
No, and actually going back to since the passage of ESEA in 1965, changes in education have come by both parties throughout the years that have followed. No Child Left Behind came in under a Republican president. Common Core came in under a Democrat. This is not a right-left issue. This is a right-wrong issue. And the bottom line is, what is in the best interest of our children? And who knows that better than the parents, the teacher, and the local school? And the problem with all of this is that it's being controlled by bureaucrats who know nothing about education in Washington, D.C. If your child has a problem at school, you're put in a position to where you can't go to the teacher. The teacher's hands are tied. You can't go to the principal. The principal's hands are tied, and so on, all the way up to the state level. And if this new reauthorization of ESEA, the new No Child Left Behind bill, is passed, it basically states that unless the state initially chooses to opt out, they will have to opt in, and all authority is given to the federal government over education.
What do you tell parents? What can they do? How do we stop this?
Well, the first thing that they need to do is get educated, get informed, and find out everything that they can. This is not just a set of standards, as we've been told. It is curriculum, but it's far above and beyond curriculum. This is far-reaching and across the board and across, across all of the agencies and departments of the federal government. These things are being linked together. Health and Human Services, Department of Education, the Department of Labor. All of these things are being tied together.
What are the best sources for research for parents to do that you use?
Well, I am in groups all over Facebook with other people who are fighting it across the nation. Stop Common Core in Alabama is a page that I am an administrator on, and I work with other administrators across the United States, and we are constantly in all of our state groups pulling information in. The second thing that I would recommend parents do after they start getting educated is to start sharing that information in their communities. Become vocal, become infuriated, realize that this is not going to go away and it's only going to get worse, and this is their children's futures. Once they have done that, then, and I was told this by a legislator himself, the way to get this legislature to act on this and bring a bill to the floor is for the parents who are the constituents of each representative, each state senator, to be blowing up their phones, just constantly calling and saying, we want this to stop, showing up during the session and saying, we want this to stop. The other thing that parents can do, and that I would recommend parents do, is opt out of the testing. The law is on the side of the authority of parents. There was a legal decision handed down last year, and I also received a legal opinion from an attorney with American Principles Project that says that Alabama has to give children the option to take the test, but it in no way is required that they be given the test. Parents have the legal right to opt their children out. A lot of parents are concerned about what opting out will do to their child. It won't stop them from being promoted. It won't.
That's the threat. Is
That's
that if they don't take the test, they're not going to move on.
They're not going to move on.
But that's not true.
That's not true. The only thing that it could affect academically is placement in advanced classes. If they don't take the test, they may lose their spot in an advanced honors gifted class. However, that's not a guarantee. And if they take the test is so skewed, they could still score so badly that they lose their spot anyway. And the really big thing that's important to know is that if you have just 5 to 6 students out of every 100 opt out, you invalidate the test, and the state can't use it. It can't be a measure of accountability. The other thing that testing does, and it's happening, it's been in place for a couple of years now in Georgia and other states, is that teacher evaluations are being tied to student performance on test scores. A recent study of student performance on standardized tests shows that there's only a 1 to 14% impact of the teacher on the child's performance on a standardized test. Wow. And that typically, if you take the same child on a standardized test and look at their test history over their entire school career, they stay pretty much in the same percentile rank, same scoring throughout.
But the teachers may be judged on those scores, even though we know those scores may not correlate with how the teacher's actually doing.
Right. That, in fact, they will. It is a requirement, and it is in the works. It has been suspended for the states who have not already enacted it, but it is in the works for all the states, and it is up to a 50% portion of their evaluation. Georgia also has a component that is based on teacher surveys by students. There's other things like their classroom evaluations that have nothing to do with the quality of the teacher's instruction. It's about the implementation of the data collection and the digital learning, the facilitation of the curriculum parts of Common Core.
There was something else I wanted to ask you, and we'll cut all this out obviously. Okay, the teacher that I had talked to recently was not sure if kids could opt out of the Compass, is that what it's called, the new Compass learning?
There are some local tests and there are some state standardized tests. And going back to the legality of it, this is what I was able to gather from some attorneys, and this is just a legal opinion, but the only things that are required of students are those things that impact the child's grade and ability for promotion. So if it is a local test that is just a benchmark test for some reason or another, or if it's a state test like the ACT, all of those, the parent has the ultimate authority to opt out.
Okay.
And school systems, I am being told by parents that school systems are still saying that opting out is not an option.
Correct.
But it is totally an option. BICE sent out a memo within the last couple of weeks, and on the second page of the memo, he says that children will, they will be given the opportunity to opt out, that they will respect parents' wishes. He goes on to talk about attendance policy, that if they're absent, that the attendance policy will be in effect. That's only for habitual absentees. That's not really a consideration for parents to be concerned about. And if their child is sent to school and the parent chooses to opt out, they will be given someplace else in the school that is supervised to be while testing is taking place. The legal opinion is that parents have the right to opt their children out, and their parental rights trump all.
If this ESA bill, which is supposedly going to happen next week, if it does reauthorize the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and those laws come into effect, will they still be able to opt out? Do you know, will parents still have, because I know parental rights are really affected by that bill. I don't know if you've heard, but
I'm not really sure what the overall repercussions will be, but I feel like this is just one more step, just like what's happening with Obamacare. People are seeing all the things that they were told would happen, and they were from the people who were against Obamacare, and now they're seeing those things coming into effect. One more step toward this total control of education, one more step toward this whole cradle to grave concept of the P20 Council, which the P in P20 stands for pre-birth. Most people think it stands for preschool. It stands for pre-birth. They are already with this early learning initiative, which is coming in for the preschool grades. That is not only being implemented by the U.S. Department of Education, it is a part of Health and Human Services. The goal is to monitor expectant mothers and those families before birth, and then follow them prior to school, and into the workforce. This kind of control is in place in Alabama. We have the P20 Council. We have Alabama Plan 2020 implementing these programs. Anything that the federal government does to make it law that we have to do these things just makes it that much harder.
what would you tell teachers? A lot of them are really scared they're going to lose their jobs.
I'm talking to teachers all the time across the nation, and they are terrified they're going to lose their jobs. They're extremely intimidated by the things that they have been told, how they have been told that basically they have no freedom of speech, that they can't speak out against it. They can lose their jobs if they do. They have been told not to post anything on social media or talk to parents in opposition to Common Core.
It doesn't sound like America, does it?
No, it does not sound like America. And as a teacher, I often had to walk a thin line with what I could say to my students and what I couldn't. But I knew that the Constitution protected my freedom of speech. The Constitution is being ignored right now, and American liberties and rights are being denied. And teachers have become property of the government. They have become spokespeople for the government. To answer your question, what would I tell teachers? I'll go back to something that happened to me in 1998. I had to take on a very corrupt principal, and I had to expose the corruption that she was dealing with. And at the time, I was very intimidated. I was very frightened. I didn't want to circumvent the chain of command. I felt like I was accountable to her. And one afternoon, I was extremely stressed out about the situation, and my son, who was then a high school senior, said, "Well, Mom, do something about it." And I said, "I can't, son. What am I going to do?" He said, "Well, there's a school board member who lives right behind us. Go talk to him. Go talk to the people at central office. Go talk to the superintendent. Speak up and tell what you know." And I said, "It doesn't work that way. I could lose my job. That could be considered insubordination." He said, "Mom, you've always told us to stand up and be leaders. You always told me and my little brother that we had to do what was right no matter what. how can you expect us to stand up and be leaders and do the right thing if you don't set the example? The next day, I got started on doing what was right. And in the end, the right thing happened. That's what I would tell teachers to do. Follow your conscience. Yes, you're scared. Yes, this is a scary time. But being submissive to this kind of control steals everything within you. And ultimately, you won't win. You'll just become property of the state.
We have about 5 minutes left. What else do you want to cover?
What can you think that we need to?
I don't know. You covered a lot.
Is there anything we need to go back over that I might need to?
No, I think you were great, and you didn't stumble around. I mean, you were really articulate.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot there.
Oh yeah, and that's just the surface.
I know.
I think you got it all.
Yeah. You might want to just reiterate the Plan 2020 in a shorter way. Just more
Oh,
of a
I know.
sound-
Yeah, I have a question I
more
want
of
to
a
ask.
soundbite.
And we're
Okay.
still on, right?
Yeah, but you
Move.
know, you're okay, but you're just a little bit further away from the
Okay.
mic than she is. Yeah,
Okay.
don't make it too obvious.
Okay.
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 I wanted to ask you, or bring this up. A lot of parents in Alabama say, "Well, we don't have Common Core in Alabama." So address that.
That is the biggest joke of all. Every state that agreed to adopt the Common Core standards has Common Core. Most states have their own name.
Right.
And the reason that the Alabama state education department can get away with saying we don't have that is because the way Common Core is written, it is copyrighted. Copyright holders are two trade organizations, the National Governors Association, which is a lobbyist trade organization, not a representative group, and the SSO, which is the National Group for State School Superintendents, also a lobbyist group, not a representative group. They hold the copyright.
What do they call it in Alabama? They don't call it
Alabama
common-
calls
they don't call it
Alabama
Common Core.
calls it the same thing that Mississippi does, except the Alabama College and Career Ready Standards. Mississippi calls it the Mississippi College and Career Ready Standards. The state of Georgia calls it Georgia Performance Standards and Common Core. And they're changing that name as we speak to Georgia Standards of Excellence. These are all just names that mean absolutely nothing. 85% of any state's package that has Common Core must be Common Core as written with no changes, deletions, or substitutions. Up to 15% can be state-specific standards. So we hear a lot of hype from people at the State Department of Education that say, oh, we've made changes in the standards, we can make changes. No. The only changes that can be made are changes to the state-specific standards, which are that 15% or less that will not be tested.
I thought of another question. Gosh, it just slipped right out my brain. Let me think here. It was right along. Oh, in a nutshell, we know that we have college and career ready standards, which is Common Core. But we also have this other thing called P20.
Yes.
What is that in a nutshell?
P20 is what we contracted with a group out of UCLA, and we have all of these groups that come into the state that consult with us and give us educational programs, give us concepts, And the P20 Council was used to help write Alabama Plan 2020. Everything that's in Alabama Plan 2020 was modeled after Obama's blueprint for implementation of Common Core standards. It took us almost a year to get Alabama Plan 2020 approved because of required rewrites that were edited and made by the U.S. Department of Education. So basically, the U.S. Department of Education wrote Alabama Plan 2020. The P20
And every state pretty much now has a Colorado Plan 2020 or
Right.
Utah Plan 2020.
Every state has its own way of implementing what was a national plan. They've just written their own version, and this is the way that this administration has circumvented Congress, because there are 3 statutes on the books that forbid a national curriculum. And so, because the federal government couldn't force states to implement a national education plan, the federal government came to states and dangled a carrot of money and said, if you want this, you come to us, and laid out ways that the states could implement the federal plan. And getting back to the P20 Council is a very socialistic way of dealing with individuals starting from pre-birth to what is considered grade 20, which would be either the doctoral level or 4 to 8 years into the workforce. It is a way of assessing children from birth up until about 5th grade to prepare them to go into the workforce, and tracking them and collecting data to assign them to a workforce track.
Okay. Is he here yet? Is Mike here? Okay.
Well, why don't you just.
You covered it all.
Do your
Yeah,
question,
okay. Lisa, thank you so much for speaking out all over, not just in Alabama, but all across the nation and on TV. You've been a guest many times on TV shows talking about this, and thank you for spending this time with us and helping parents in Alabama understand what we're really facing.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.